Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today I am back to talk about The House with the Golden Door by Elodie Harper, which is the sequel to The Wolf Den. The Wolf Den was one of my favourite historical fiction reads from last year, so I was very much anticipating the sequel. There's really no way that I can talk about this sequel without kind of spoiling the ending of The Wolf Den, so what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to briefly give you a synopsis of The Wolf Den. If that takes your fancy, then I would say click off the video now, go read the book, and then come back, because as I say, there will be slight spoilers for the ending. It's really inescapable if I'm going to talk about the plot of this book and at least the setup and the premise of it. So The Wolf Den is set in 74 AD in Pompeii, so we are a few years short of the eruption of Vesuvius, and we are mainly following the character of Amara. Amara was originally from Greece and from a fairly well-to-do family. Her father was a doctor. However, despite this fairly happy childhood, her mother ended up selling her into slavery, and we meet Amara as an adult working in Pompeii's brothels. This particular brothel being referred to as the Wolf Den and being owned by this rather malicious, unfeeling pimp called Felix. He's definitely the antagonist of this story, definitely the villain, but he's also got shades and layers where you can kind of sympathise with him. You can pick out moments where he's being pragmatic and you can sympathise with him, all while seeing how cruel he is. Amara obviously doesn't work alone, and through the Wolf Den you're really seeing this camaraderie, these relationships that build between these women who work at the Wolf Den. Particularly strong is the relationship between Amara and her best friend Dido. The main thread of this story is Amara really trying to use all of her wit, her talent and her skill in order to secure her freedom by whatever means possible, making herself indispensable to Felix so that he starts to see her as a right-hand woman, but also trying to entice any men, any powerful men who come to the brothel to maybe take such a shine to her that they would end up granting her freedom. In terms of my judgment on the original one, it was definitely a very strong 4-star for me. I really loved how this environment was built up, though we don't get to see a whole lot of Pompeii due to the restriction of Amara's very being as a slave. You're getting to see a lot of the underbelly of Pompeii. It's a slower pace, but that slow pace really lets you get to know these characters, understand the relationships between them. You really end up developing such an affection for a lot of these characters, seeing their strengths and weaknesses, seeing the shades of light and dark in them. And I was just really rooting for Amara and her fellow women to be able to break out of the Wolf Den. One very prominent figure in Pompeii from this time period does make an appearance, and I'm not going to spoil that for you, but it was really delightful to see. So yeah, it's definitely a book that I would recommend that you read. And at this point I'm going to now start talking about The House with the Golden Door, so if you do not want spoilers for that book, then I would say turn away now, close the video, but you know, come back when you're done with The Wolf Den. The House with the Golden Door picks up not too long after the events of The Wolf Den. The end of The Wolf Den sees Amara being freed, having been bought and acquired by Rufus, a growing political figure in Pompeii, who is also a peer of Pliny the Elder. We see Amara really adjusting to her new life as a freed woman, but also how she can't completely let her former life go. She's still very much grieving for Dido, who died at the end of the last book, and finding herself increasingly drawn back to the women that she left behind, especially since she doesn't really see how she fits into this world, this new elite society that she isn't really welcome in. You know, these elite families that she is interacting with know her past, and she grows more aware of quite how tenuous her position is. Her position as a free woman lasts only as long as Rufus is interested in her. Though right now she may be free, there's still no safety in that. There are still strict expectations that she has to live up to. Her movement is almost as restricted as it was in the Wolf Den, only the boundaries are just a bit different. As a result of this, she comes to understand that she has to make herself a bit more financially independent, and the best way to do that is to kind of go back to her old life in a way. We see her as she buys some of the women back from the Wolf Den to serve her. Just this impossibility of leaving behind your old life unless you've completely cut away that old life. You have to completely cut yourself away from it to really have a clean break and escape. But now that she has these other women with her, she finds that the dynamic is completely different. She is now an owner rather than a peer to these women, and how quickly it is to slip into that master-slave dynamic and become the very thing that you hated most. I actually went to a talk with Elodie Harper at Blackwell's a couple of months ago when this book first came out. I remember her actually saying that she thought that this was a much better book to The Wolf Den, and I would have to concur with that. I do think that this was a stronger installment to the series, and I'm very much looking forward to where this story goes. There are lots of twists and turns in this story, some that I definitely did predict going in, one which maybe I should have seen coming, but I was still kind of floored that it happened, and just like on the edge of my seat thinking, oh my god, how are we gonna get out of this? I really enjoy how this new dynamic with Amara really shifts a lot of the relationships that she has to the women of the Wolf Den. This big change of her becoming a free woman, whilst they are not, that really provides comfort for her, but also does strain the relationship because they are not on the same level anymore. Even as she might want it to be, even as they might want it to be, there are still expectations in place. You're getting to see even more layers of each of these characters, particularly characters that didn't get quite as much of a spotlight in the Wolf Den. Britannica, who is a slave who was stolen from Britain, particularly being quite a highlight. You only get to see a little glimpse of her in The Wolf Den, where in this I think she's just such a powerhouse. And through Britannica, you're also getting to see just like the scope of the Roman Empire. You're not just getting a sense of the Roman Empire as it relates to Pompeii, but also as it relates to other countries around Europe, and the influence and the power and some of the cruelty and brutality that is involved in empire. I will say there was one reveal about Britannica's past that I did slightly, ever so slightly, roll my eyes at. Actually no, to be fair, I was one part rolling my eyes to one part, ooh, interesting. And I can't really spoil what that is for you, and it is just like a little incidental thing, but I feel like if you were to come to it, you'd know what I mean and be like, oh, interesting. One of the things that people talk about when they talk about the Wolf Den trilogy is the use of modern language in here. You know, the characters in this do not conform to language that you would kind of traditionally expect. It is very modern, it is very colloquial. I wouldn't say quite as strongly as things like The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, which is for me like my upper limit as to what I will deal with when it comes to modern language in historical works. But you know, definitely notable. Nothing in these speech patterns feels antiquated as you might expect. And that is something to bear in mind. It's not something that ever really bothers me. I've seen some really interesting commentary from other channels talking about how the reason that these characters are using it is because they are meant to be like the lowest of the low. It's meant to show that they are this lower social strand, and as a way to make them more relatable and for us to really understand them. I don't know how much I buy into that and how much I think that that's a valid way of interpreting it. I just kind of feel like if you want to use colloquial language, go right ahead. If you're not going to like it, then you're not going to like it, and you just deal with it. I don't know, it doesn't bother me. I don't think it's quite as big a deal as I think it's often made out to be. Another thing I really liked about this is that with Amara's newfound freedom, you are getting to get a little bit wider of a scope of Pompeii. You're getting a lot more movement around different parts of the city. There is that restriction because Amara really shouldn't be going and venturing out too far. There's also a moment in here where she actually ventures outside of Pompeii, and that was really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to how Elodie Harper expands more of this world in future books. I think this book is also just a little bit more plotty, a little bit more pacey. Where we find Amara at the end of this book is completely different to how we find her at the beginning. She kind of goes from here to here in the Wolf Den, whereas in the House with the Golden Door she goes from here to here. The stakes are different for her. They are so much higher than they were before. Her relationships to pretty much everybody in the story end up changing immensely throughout this book. Almost no stone is unturned, and I like that. I like the way that Elodie Harper was able to touch on all of these different characters, but it not kind of feeling like she's trying to check off a to-do list of, okay, you need to interact with this person and this person, and she's not tying up loose ends. For some, you are definitely left kind of like, oh, what's going to happen now? There is a pull and an incentive for you to read the next book, and especially with the looming threat of the volcano on the horizon, I'm very much interested to see where she does end this story. So there we go. Those are some of my thoughts about The House with the Golden Door by Elodie Harper. As I say, absolutely enjoyed this. I'm very much hoping that this trilogy does just go from strength to strength. Having actually met Elodie Harper and heard her speak about this series, I have every hope that she is going to end this story with a bang. Whether or not that is literal, we'll have to see. As I just said, there is a volcano on the horizon, and considering how much she was able to pack into the story, it'll be interesting to see how all of these different characters end up turning out and changing in the next one. Do let me know if you have read The House with the Golden Door, any thoughts that you had of it. Do you have any more recommendations for books that are set in Pompeii? The Wolf Den and The House with the Golden Door is pretty much, I think, the only thing that I've read that is set in Pompeii, or just any other historical fiction books that you recommend to me. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye!